Chris Krebs, who is our, I will say he is the coalition's favorite acting undersecretary. And most trade groups don't go around talking about who their favorite acting undersecretary is, but in this case, I think it's like a sort of no competition situation, since Chris was actually involved in the founding of the coalition, and was extremely supportive of it getting together and coming out of when he was working at Microsoft, and helped to in a lot of the decisions about how the coalition would operate, and certainly in the policy matters in which we would cover and not cover. So in his capacity at Microsoft before going into the government. So when he went into the government, we lost a very good member of the coalition, very active member, and a good friend, but we gained a favorite acting what became a favorite assistant secretary, and now favorite acting undersecretary. In general, though, I mean, Chris is really so thoughtful on these issues. It's great to have him at DHS again. He was there before. He was in the private sector. He's also an alum of George Mason University Law School before there was a National Security Institute. And so it's great to have him as a representative of one of the institutions that we have as one of our co-sponsors here as well. So with that, I want to hand things over to Chris. Thanks for doing this.
Good afternoon. I didn't say it to Bree, but I meant to say it as I was walking in. I think if you guys had this beautiful facility at the beginning of the coalition, I probably would have come to more meetings instead of dialing in. And it's a closer walk to the old Microsoft office. But thank you. I've got, what do you have me sign up for here, 30 minutes or so? I can talk or not talk for 30 minutes. I do want to have some time for Q&A. I think there's been a lot going on in the last several months in terms of federal cybersecurity policy. I think this is a great forum, and that was kind of the mindset of, I believe, when we were setting the forum up or the coalition up. It's how do we get cybersecurity-focused companies and organizations together to talk through the thorny legal and policy issues, because those conversations weren't necessarily happening in a number of the other fora and venues in town. So this, kudos to you for leaning forward and setting it up, Ari, and to the other founding members. Maybe we'll get a drink later. So in my current role, am I triple-hatted or just, no, I guess I'm just dual-hatted. It is my third position since I came in the department in March, much to against the advice of a few people in this room. So I started out as a senior counselor to the secretary. I just looked at a couple of them. I came in as senior counselor to the Secretary for Cybersecurity, Infrastructure, and Resilience, which basically means I advised General Kelly on the issues that took place in NPPD, FEMA, and portions of science and technology, but also a bit of Secret Service and ICE Homeland Security investigations, particularly the cybercrime elements. Over time, which was always kind of the plan, I matured out of the front office, I guess, as General Kelly went up to the White House. I clicked over to NPPD after an appointment by the president as the Assistant Secretary for Infrastructure Protection. And that actually was a known quantity for me back in the Bush years. I was a senior policy advisor to an assistant secretary back then when we established the National Infrastructure Protection Plan and some of those public-private partnership frameworks that date back a number of years, but also was around in the early days of the department's cybersecurity, the early days of cybersecurity at DHS, when there was just a national cybersecurity division, and then eventually, of course, a U.S. CERT. And over time, the budgets of those organizations have kind of gone like that. So now the Office of Cybersecurity and Communications is a pretty significant organization. I think well over 1,000 billets and probably close to 1.2 billion or so in terms of enacted funding. And the Office of Infrastructure Protection has probably around 700, 800 billets, but not quite as much in terms of funding. A lot of that is programs that we'll talk about in a little bit. So as also within NPPD, or the National Protection and Programs Directorate, which is a horrible name that I'll talk about in a minute, as the senior official, I get the double duty of acting as the senior official performing the duties of the undersecretary, the SOPDUS, as Gillis likes to remind me. The SOPDUS is, it basically it means by statute I can't be the acting undersecretary. There's the Vacancies Act, which has a couple of restrictions on what you can be formally called. So due to the fact that I came in when I did, I wasn't there before Suzanne Spalding left, and other issues, I'm not able to be called acting, but I won't hold it against you if you do call me acting. But in the meantime, I do step into the role of Suzanne and some of the great things that the last team did, and carry forward a number of the cybersecurity policies. But as the threat landscape, of course, continues to get incredibly and increasingly scary, we're advancing the way we're thinking about a number of things. And I think a fresh look from the administration enables me to do that a little bit. But at the same time, when you go back, and I think the President's Homeland Security Advisor, Tom Bossert, said it earlier this week, Executive Order 13800, which was released in earlier in the spring, is more than anything, it's kind of a stitching back together of a number of the previous administration's cybersecurity policies with a little bit of emphasis in certain areas, but certainly re-emphasizes the notion of accountability across federal networks at the department and agency head level, certainly promulgating and reinforcing the concept of adoption of the NIST cybersecurity framework, which a number of folks in this room, Adam, were instrumental in pulling forward. So again, a lot of good work's been done, and we're working to build on that. And I think there's with some renewed attention, we can continue progress. So in terms of NPPD, where we sit and what we own, two primary responsibilities, and that's both protecting federal networks, and certainly the non-national security systems, but primarily the federal civilian agency networks. And then secondarily, primary or lead coordinator for protecting national critical infrastructure. And so when it comes to a mission statement, it's pretty much just that. We're leading the nation's efforts to coordinate or protect national critical infrastructure. That's a top line, really brief mission statement. And under that, we're thinking about three main goals. And it's almost like a pyramid. And I thought I saw a mirror in here earlier, but it actually looks a lot like what the Israelis are doing. At the top of the pyramid, the way I look at it is we have a primary top goal of protecting federal networks and facilities. And so that addresses a lot of the National Cybersecurity Protection System efforts underway in the Office of Cybersecurity and Communications, but also we do have responsibility under the Federal Protective Service to deploy security around and around protecting GSA managed facilities. So top one is number one priority. Every day we wake up and we're thinking about what we need to do to protect federal networks. Number two is, again, a carrying forward of a previous administration policy of addressing systemic risk and thinking, a lot of you may think about this in terms of another executive order, 13636, and Section 9. So what are those what are those facilities that if there was a cyber event would be that the impacts could be that catastrophic, particularly from a systemic. So it's not necessarily thinking about a single facility or a single location. It's what is that sector, and particularly from an interdependency perspective, when you stitch it all together, bulk payment systems is a great example in the financial services sector. So we're not talking about one facility, we're talking about a system of systems across facilities or a sector. So that's number two. Number three, finally, and that, again, that systemic risk is kind of a top-down approach. The third is enabling better practices, security practices across industry. That's a bottom-up. And I already mentioned the NIST cybersecurity framework, but that would be an example of whatever we can do to push that sort of scalable tool or solution out there to more broadly incentivize, enable policies. That's the third thing that every day when we wake up, we come into the office, we're thinking about. What I kind of like to do is unpack each of those very briefly and then talk about maybe some lessons learned over the last few incidents, particularly the ransomware events of the last several months. When we think about that protecting federal networks, it's a layered approach, likely of interest to a number of the folks in the room, but we have a couple of programs that are really a binning up of a number of commercial solutions or commercially available solutions that can deploy into federal networks. The continuous diagnostics and mitigation programs is one of those. There are 4 phases. First is what's on the network. Second is who's on the network. Third is what's going on in the network. And the 4th phase is what's the next step? What is it, mobility? What does cloud look like in terms of deploying these tools? That is something that we've been working on. It's probably taken a little bit longer than anyone would have liked, but that's because I don't think we actually had a full appreciation of what the problem was. So when phase 1 went out there in the last administration, there was a deployment of the tools just to figure out the asset management and the inventorying of connected devices on an enterprise. In some cases, there was a 200% oversubscription, if not maybe a little bit more. And the initial phases of CDM, DHS is responsible for picking up the tab. And so when you get into this situation where you have a multiple oversubscription, that's going to slow things down. It's going to change your bottom line a little bit. It's going to require a little bit of engagement with the Hill on how we're going to do this going forward. Now, going forward with the who's on the network, matching that up with what's on the network, that's going to enable us that kind of federal enterprise-wide risk picture. And Jeanette Manford, the Assistant Secretary for Cybersecurity and Communications at DHS, has been on a push lately to talk about the federal dashboard. And that, again, gives you a sense of, we haven't had before, but gives us a sense of what is the state of software, what's the state of hardware on federal networks that are plugged in. And so when we think about back in the spring, WannaCry that's exploiting a certain vulnerability, we would have been able to immediately pull up, okay, who's impacted? How can we engage with those facilities or those agencies and help close out that risk? Now, the better part about that story is actually over the course of time, through some of the binding operational directives that Michael and the team in DHS had led last year, or in the year before, was addressing those critical vulnerabilities, making sure we're closed out. We have a timeline where each time there's a critical or severe vulnerability, there's a timeline and a requirement that you can measure against to ensure they're closed. So when we think about WannaCry, and we think about Petya, and now that we're looking at Bad Rabbit, there is a certain degree of success, I think, domestically told about the vulnerabilities were patched because everybody's forward-leaning on patch management. And so that's, partly because of the folks in this room, but also some of the policies of the past that have been able to pull forward. And you look at these overseas infections likely due to either not patching systems, unlicensed systems, pirated systems, something along those lines. So lots more to do here, but there's a good foundation. And if I could do anything, I'd probably turn up the speed a little bit and get us a little bit faster in terms of deployment. And then, of course, you throw on top of that one of the more probably historical systems dating back to the Bush years of Einstein, and that's the endpoint IPS, IDS. And that's just, a lot of people have mentioned, I think it came up in a House hearing today, Einstein's 15-year-old technology. Well, yes or no, but it's not the only thing that's holding the line. There's a layer of defense. We've got stuff on the perimeter. We're improving it, but we also are inside. And I think where we need to go ultimately, and it's in some of the IT modernization reports that have come out of the White House and the executive order, but we need to get to a point where we're managing the data, we're securing the data, and we have a classification prioritization scheme. So when you think about another policy from the last team was high-value assets. We have scarce resources right now. How are we prioritizing? What are we protecting? So that's some of the federal networks issues. In terms of systemic risk and more broadly enabling infrastructure, systemic risk is a funny thing, and we can work. It's kind of whack-a-mole, right? We can work facility to facility, or we can step back and without competing with the private sector, look back and get a fuller appreciation of what actually is that kind of like that spectrum of risk in a certain space, and who are the kind of Pareto principle, but what's the smallest number of companies we can work with to have an improved security outcome. Columbia just pushed out a report a little bit ago just about that. Like, what are the investments that have the most impact? So an example here, how do we more smartly engage the critical infrastructure community and for scalable results? So an example would be in the industrial control system space. I can go out and engage 25,000 different manufacturers in endpoints to help improve or patch some system that they have, some control system deployed. Or I can go work with the 5 or 6 different control systems manufacturers that have the most broad impact between, Rockwell, Honeywell, ABB, Siemens. Get there, understand the risk, and help them improve their cybersecurity posture. And then we get out to the endpoints. Work that system to the root cause. And I think that's, again, DHS, we're catching up to some of the other federal agencies, DOD, FBI, and the others that have been in the game a little bit longer. They have more direct authorities. We're still playing a partnership game, which I'm actually perfectly happy playing. I think it's the right way to play, because at the moment, I don't think regulation, frankly, is going to keep up with the adversary. So to the extent we can continue engaging and help provide information to get the products better out of industry, we're going to be in a better spot. So with that, scalable solutions, but also smarter stakeholder engagement. One of the things, and I came in, and I'm not going to lie, while I had been a part of the National Cyber Incident Response Plan Working Group out of industry last year as a representative from the IT Sector Coordinating Council, I read the plan. I read the NCIRP. I helped contribute to it, but I don't think I had it memorized. Certainly, apparently I had the National Response Framework memorized during hurricane season, because that was a fun 8 weeks. But with the NCIRP, when things like WannaCry hit, NotPetya hit, there was a lot of doctrine and response policy that had been written that was good stuff that a lot of people, I think a handful of people, and particularly some of those in the room that were there, were read up on it, but it was still kind of newer stuff. There'd been a couple things that we'd had to use the NCIRP and the Unified Coordination Group ConOps, but at the same time, it wasn't rote. There wasn't a lot of muscle memory around it. So I was guilty of it as anybody. When WannaCry popped on that Friday afternoon, I picked up the phone and called Jeanette Manfred, who was the acting deputy undersecretary, and I said, I'm just going to come over to the NKIC and just hang out and see what we'll do. And Neil, that was a fun afternoon and evening where we picked up the phone immediately, and I'm pretty sure that there are at least 3 or 4 people in this room that I called and said, hey, what are you guys seeing? Do you have samples? We need to get this stuff as quickly as possible. So when we think about smarter stakeholder engagements, we've made a lot of investments in terms of automation and signing credas and getting people onto the NKIC floor. But I'm telling you, there's nothing that beats just picking up the phone and using those trusted relationships, calling people and say, hey, we've got a common purpose here. What can we do to slow down to shorten the curve and ensure we're getting better information quicker and we can act faster? Within a couple hours, I think, of WannaCry actually kind of standing up an internal DHS group and getting to the enhanced coordination procedures, we had a trust group of a number of industry partners on the phone, sharing information, pushing samples back and forth. It wasn't just domestic. We also had this internationally. We were going cert to cert on a number of these things. And we got a pretty good handle on the picture. I wouldn't necessarily say by Friday night, but into Saturday morning, there was an 8 a.m. meeting at the White House that I was rolling in, and I had, based on the work that the NKIC had done with some of the other federal cyber centers, we had a pretty good picture that we could tell the cabinet. That kind of repeated itself a few months later, maybe it was even just 6 or so weeks later with NotPetya. Honestly, the way I found out about NotPetya was I was sitting in Fairfax Medical or something, taking my kids in to get tubes in their ears. And I'm just watching Twitter. And there's some really interesting stuff popping up out of Russia and Ukraine. And I'm checking with the NKIC, and they're seeing it too. And just the way that information flows, particularly on these ransomware campaigns, it's not necessarily coming in off the high side. There's a lot of open source data that's tipping off. So we've got to think about a better way to not just use some of the unique federal assets, but use our sensor networks of partner organizations and companies, certs, and some of the social media tools to help us kind of get ahead and get that sensor network, or rather use the sensor network to have a better response. And then, of course, Bad Rabbit, same thing comes around yesterday morning. Same sort of thing happens. We're starting to see these ransomware infections pop up, and it's, again, activating the network, calling people. You know who's good, you know who's got info, and you start pulling the thread. But we can't stop there. So I think the call to action here is don't be afraid to reach out. Every single person in this room, every single company in this room is invited to come over to DHS, tour the NKIC, get a better sense of how we can all work together. If you haven't been, it's worth a visit. We can, if you got a clearance, we can do fun things there. If not, we'll bring it down and you can take a tour. But that's the invitation I give out to everybody. So let's figure out how, as a community, as a security community, we can address the risk environment. Because I thought I saw a lot of cool stuff at Microsoft based on that telemetry. There's a lot of other cool stuff out there, and this problem is not going away. The threat is asymmetric. The barriers to entry are minimal. The fact that malware is commoditized to the extent it is means anybody with an internet connection and a couple of shekels can get in the game. That's going to be a problem. So whatever we can do, not just on the response side, but pushing all the way left to boom as much as we can into the network protection space. If we're not doing it, we need to, and if we're not doing it fast enough, I'm not sure why we're doing what we are. So. Not sure how long I just went on, Ari, but I'm happy to do Q&A. Yeah, go ahead.
But Representative Langevin sort of hit on it the most, which was automated indicator sharing program. Is it successful in your view? And either way, what can be done to make it better?
Okay, so this is kind of like last week. I testified in front of Senate Armed Services, and both Chairman McCain and Senator Warren were looking for these binary answers of, are we winning or losing? Yes or no, have we done this, that, or the other? So is it working or not? I think we have a successful program. Just signed out a report yesterday evening that's going to go up to the Hill on the status of AIS. I think from an implementation perspective, we are fully operational. We are fully deployed. Now, is that your metric of success? If it is, then yes, we're successful. I think the other metrics of success are actual participation in the program. I don't know of a single DHS program, particularly in the cyber or physical space, that had thousands of people sign up overnight. I could be wrong, but I think we're not necessarily where we should be, and we need more. So again, what I would put out there is let's talk. I think everybody in this room, but also a lot of your customers. We're not in the game to compete with anybody, but I think we've certainly got space we need to go, and that's not just domestic, but we're also moving out, partnering with other countries. So we've got a number of countries that we're in the process. Either we finalized agreements or we're getting there.
Anything else?
Come on. You want me to talk?
We will take you up on the NKIC tour offer, though. The coalition will. I don't know about other people. Last chance. Okay, Belly.
My name is Belisario Contreras. I work for the Organization of American States. I've been working with DHS for many years. So I think all our member states actually, and many countries around the world look at the U.S. for the views on the internet and cybersecurity, free, secure, and open internet. So far, we have been working very close with the state on international issues, and DHS, of course, with CSNC and US CERT. But you're talking about policy. What will be the policy? What you will be on working with other countries? What will be the policy working with, for example, I was with, I chair in Mexico 2 months ago. They are working on a national cybersecurity strategy. how will be the relationship with developing countries on protecting the critical infrastructure of the United States? Attacks are not happening, are not coming from the US, are coming from abroad, are not coming from Germany or from France, where the US have the tight relationships. So how will the Department of Homeland Security work with countries in Africa, Asia Pacific, and the Americas region? That's really important. Well, for me as a resident and actually for the organization that I'm working right now.
Got it. So, Chris, I'm going to try to answer this. I may have to fall back to you for more of the strategic concepts that you had in place at State. But the executive order 13800 did require a report on international engagement and international strategy. DHS sent up a report that I thought was actually, that exercise in and of itself was valuable, because what it did was articulate a series of engagements that we had globally, and not just in Europe, not just in Asia, but South America. Frankly, this was a true global international. Wouldn't say it was a strategy just yet, but it was, at least from the department's perspective, it was an articulation. Here are the things where we're engaging both bilaterally and multilaterally, and generally speaking, here are some of the objectives we have. So one of the takeaways I had was more of okay, what are our true regional objectives in terms of critical infrastructure? But you're right, globally speaking, particularly North America, between Mexico and Canada, just the intertwined nature of our infrastructure, if we're not thinking about this problem cross-border, then we're not doing it the right way. More broadly down into South America, that was actually a area of significant interest for General Kelly when he was, primarily due to his time at Southcom. But we were embarking across a number of initiatives in South America that were critical infrastructure focused, particularly those that had of significant interest to the United States. So I wouldn't say that there's any sort of preference for Europe or Asia or anything. The way we look at it is there are opportunities for particularly capacity building globally, but we've got to look at things strategically and particularly with our scarce resources.
And the only thing I'd add to that is that every single agency, almost every single agency, not every agency, but almost every single agency did a similar report after 45 days, and that was all coalesced and kind of racked and stacked because different departments, as you might imagine, might have different priorities in different countries. Right. And so getting that picture across all the U.S. government, I think, was really valuable, and putting that together in something that's more comprehensive, I think, was really important.
Right.
But it didn't, as you said, it doesn't favor one region, but it identifies the problems and the opportunities in each region. And it's something that really had to be done anyway. I mean, the last international strategy was back in 2011.
Yeah, and I think more broadly, so the President's Homeland Security Advisor mentioned it yesterday, in fact. Ryan's about. The administration is working on both a national security strategy and a cybersecurity strategy. The national security strategy will come first. That'll inform the subsequent. There is a cyber component of the national security strategy that will then tee up a cybersecurity strategy. And I would not expect any dramatic change in terms of how we do things. Yeah, there may be a different or more detail in terms of deterrence or anything like that. But from a network protection perspective, you're going to continue to see building and reemphasis of a lot of the existing policies. And again, it's a progressive policy arc that begins way back in, if not earlier, 1997, that pulls straight through EO 13636, PPD 41, PPD 21, and all the NCRP and all that.
Another question? Executive order from Eric Wenger from Cisco. Executive order from May has the agencies reporting, or they had them reporting into the OMB and DHS about their use of the framework. I was wondering if you could give us any sort of initial impressions on what you've seen from that reporting and how DHS is going to use that information.
I was told that there would be no hard questions. No, Eric, let me get back to you on that one. I don't have any sort of metrics around that, the usage of the framework, but I do. There are a number of good efforts underway. In fact, Pamela mentioned what she's doing with some of the small and micro agencies, which I think is a great step. We need more scalable solutions across the federal interagency. There are a lot of the big networks or the big agencies that get. And same goes, frankly, for small and medium-sized businesses. It's just we're talking ultimately. There's a time distance problem, and add on to that dollars, and we need solutions that can be replicated. And I think the framework, having been I don't know, was I a plank holder of the framework? Not really. I was a contractor, but. Anyway, those are things that we need to not just work on here domestically, but to a certain extent, help other countries come to a similar sort of outcome.
Thank you very much.
I completely forgot to make my plug for renaming NPPD. Damn it.
Go do it.
All right.
Do it. Quick.
Do it. So I mentioned up front, I have a terrible name in soap dust, but an even worse name in the National Protection and Programs Directorate. One of the things we've been working on with House Homeland is something that Suzanne Spalding was very passionate about in the last administration. It's giving NPPD a name that actually communicates to its stakeholders and stakeholder set what we do, and customer set, that's what I was looking for, actually tells them what we do very clearly. National Protection Programs Directorate doesn't tell you a damn thing. Good example, I was down in Puerto Rico 2-3 weeks ago meeting with the governor's team, and I was alongside the Coast Guard Commandant, TSA Administrator, FEMA Administrator, and we were having a conversation about various lines of effort that were going on in support of response and recovery. It came to me due to ESF2 communications and the National Communications Center. I was giving her a bit of an update on, or giving the governor rather, an update on cell coverage. And at the time, it was pretty bad. It was about 88% of the towers on the island had been knocked offline. However, working with some of our telecommunications partners, had been able to get temporary coverage on the island. So I was like, hey, look, we're actually at about 60% right now. So kind of I won't say good news story because I think that's in the forbidden list, but look, it was a story of progress on the island where there, frankly, at that early time, there weren't a lot. So she gets, the governor goes immediately to a press event, and I think Congresswoman Gonzalez-Colon was there as well. So subsequently, the Congresswoman gets up there and says, yeah, look, everyone, look at the federal family that's here, FEMA, TSA, U.S. Coast Guard, the comms guy. And I was like, well, now, had I a name that she could remember instead of National Protection Programs Directorate, something like, I don't know, the National Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, hey, it needs work, it's not perfect, but at least it tells you, much like the Brits with their National Cybersecurity Center, it tells you what they do. And that's really important. I'm not going to say it's half the battle, but I think it's a big part of it. So not saying asking you to do anything, but it'd be great if we got that bill out of the House next week. And as soon as that happens, I'm going to go over to the Senate side and have a talk with Chairman McCain, because he said in the Senate Armed Services hearing, I made the same pitch, and he goes, you tell us what name you want, other than Mr. President, you got it. So I'm gonna hold into that one. But that's my pitch, and I can't believe I forgot to work on it at the beginning. But anyway.
Thanks. A round of applause for our favorite Top Dust.